next commission we'll talk about is the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission. This is and again, kind of a unique commission. It's a little bit different than planning and zoning. It's quite a bit different, and it has some unique characteristics about it. Again, this is the enabling legislation that, and you'll also notice that in this legislation, each municipality is required. Again, sort of, no, this isn't a may. This is really kind of a shall. They are required to establish these commissions. It's based on the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act of 1972. And unlike other commissions, this is, again, a required thing that municipalities need to do. And in this case, the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses commissions are not necessarily working direct agents of the town. They really are direct agents of the state in this case. So they're enacting a state act and applying it locally. So they're a little bit different in that case. It's a subtle difference, but a difference nonetheless. So let's take a look at just some of these elements that the wetlands, so-called wetlands commissions, what they are working with. Certainly first is to know what a wetlands is, and I think most people in Connecticut probably know, since a lot of the area is wet, but it's an area basically that due to some sort of the condition of the land, either it's topography, general, soils, etc., that soil, surface water rather, collects and a groundwater discharge corrects. That makes the area wet for an extended period of time. It has a lot of impacts on things, and certainly in Connecticut, this is obviously the state of Connecticut with the town boundaries on it, and those purple areas in there are essentially all the wetland areas, so-called inland wetlands in Connecticut. And generally, if we look at that, that's about 17% of the state is classified as inland wetlands. So that's a lot of turf. And so the wetlands commissions are really responsible for the activities that occur within those purple areas. So the Connecticut wetlands are regulated. There's two different types of wetlands. One is this idea of an inland wetland, which is defined by soil type. And this is the primary type of wetland that is regulated by the local Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Commissions. There is another type of wetland in Connecticut, and that is the tidal wetlands. And these are defined not by soil type, but by generally vegetation, so the kind of plants growing there, and also the amount of tidal inundation, how much water does it get per day from the tides. And the tidal wetlands are regulated by the state. So these are not necessarily regulated by the local commissions. So ultimate regulatory authority for all the navigable waters and wetlands lies with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they use a definition that includes both hydrology, vegetation, and soil. So there are federally regulated wetlands, state regulated wetlands, and the fine points between these two you can you'll either work out with your town staff or with the state Connecticut DEP Wetland staff, who will also be quite helpful in this. Now, the key powers and duties here, there's some similarities in between the commissions on this. One is key duty, power and duty that the Inland Wetlands Commission has is to establish regulations and boundaries of the regulations, and to hear and consider, decide among petitions for changes to the regulations. So again, this is a legislative sort of function of the commission. The administrative functions of the commission are certainly one is basically to hear, consider, and decide upon applications for regulated activities within the inland wetlands and watercourses, and determine what activities are exempt from those regulations. We'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. To enforce the regulations, so if there's a violation, to actually act on some of those, and to hear appeals from any decision that a designated inland wetlands agent, a so-called wetlands enforcement officer, might make. So this is sort of a judiciary type of judicial function they might have on that. And certainly another one is an advisory role that they serve as to advise other local commissions, planning, zoning, in particular on wetlands protection and how specific acts or applications might affect wetlands. Some key terms as a wetlands commissioner are the concept of regulated areas, upland review areas, regulated uses or activities, and uses permitted as of right. Just quickly look at some of these things. Regulated areas, sort of talked about already. One is that wetlands, the idea of a wetland, is defined by soil type, and these types of soils are generally in Connecticut defined as poorly drained, very poorly drained, or alluvial and floodplain soils. And this map here is a map that shows essentially these types of soil types: the poorly drained, very poorly drained, and the alluvial floodplain soils in a specific town. And you can see essentially these are pretty defined areas. So this is what defines a wetlands, and this is an area that is regulated by an Inland Wetlands Commission. Watercourses have a definition by statute. It is very, very long, but essentially it's a lot of the things you would think about: your rivers, streams, brooks, waterways, lakes, ponds, and bogs, and those sorts of things. Also, things like vernal pools or intermittent streams can also be considered this within watercourses. And again, you also apply your regulations to activities that might occur within them. Upland review areas, these are defined as non-wetland areas that are upland from, as it says, upland from the regulated wetland or watercourse. Sometimes these upland review areas are called buffers. That's not necessarily correct. Usually buffers have more are sort of a defined regulatory boundary. This isn't necessarily an area of no activity. This is an area of review. As it says, DEP recommends a 100-foot wide review area, so upland review area. But the towns have many different, going from as little as 15 to 20 feet up to in some cases into the hundreds of feet of review areas. The idea of this upland review area is to analyze how the potential activity is going to impact, within that upland review area, is going to impact the regulated area, the wetland or watercourse. And if there's felt to be a direct impact, looking at ways to try to mitigate that impact. Now, regulated uses or regulated activities are essentially defined as any activity or operation that has a direct impact on the wetland or watercourse, and this particularly in terms of removal of soil or other elements within the wetland or watercourse, deposition of material into it, obstruction, alteration, or pollution of that wetland or watercourse. So that's generally a regulated activity. There are uses that are permitted as of right within wetlands or watercourses, and that are outlined here. This is not an exhaustive list. There's a much larger list you can find within our fact sheets. But certainly these are some of the key ones. Particularly agricultural and agricultural uses are generally uses that are permitted as of right. And part of your job as a commissioner is determining whether this is a regulated activity or if it's a activity permitted as of right. Now, when you're looking at an impact of an application on a wetland or watercourse, there's several factors that need to be considered. One is certainly the environmental impact of the action on the resource, whether there is a feasible or prudent alternative to that potential activity within the wetlands or watercourse. So if there's something that could be done, a way of realigning the potential development or activity so that it would have less of an impact, you might consider those. Short and long-term impacts of the proposed action. So certainly a short-term impact would be considered differently than a long-term impact on that wetland or watercourse. Whether it's an irreversible loss of a wetland resource, certainly an important factor. the type and degree of injury that might occur, particularly in terms of health, safety, and welfare of both existing properties and surrounding properties caused by the action, and then certainly the impact on surrounding wetland resources. Now, there is excellent resources and training that's provided by the Connecticut DEP, and part of, if you look at the fact sheet that is within on the online academy site, you'll see that there are some requirements for education for the Commission. So I strongly suggest going to the Connecticut DEP site, shown here on the slide. Go in there, type in that search box, type in inland wetlands, go to this webpage, and you'll see there are trainings, excellent day-long trainings that DEP puts on several times a year, as well as some online resources and DVDs and other things that can help you learn a little bit more about your responsibilities and some of the fine points within inland wetlands law and application of that law.